Okay, we are ready to begin. So, Richard, are we live? It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this, the third and final online session of Yachad BeYeshua's North American Conference, which we are also sharing with our brothers and sisters, members and friends from around the world. We've been focusing on what Ahavat Yisrael means for us as Jewish disciples of Yeshua. I'd like to just begin with an opening prayer, invoking God's presence as we seek to grow deeper in our life as Jewish disciples of Yeshua. Avinu Shabashamayim, we bless you for these days that we have had together. We thank you for our friendship and for our fellowship, for new friends, for the way in which you open our hearts and minds through our relationships with one another, for this remarkable call that you've given to us in Yachad BeYeshua, that we might transcend our many differences and that we might expand our hearts, that our hearts might be like your heart. We pray for our people Israel throughout the world. We also pray for your church, and we pray for this broken world, that the mercy of Messiah Yeshua might enfold us all, and that you in your great power might bring us into the fullness of kingdom life. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. On the opening night of our conference, I cited some words of Franz Rosenzweig, who spoke to assimilated German Jews early in the 20th century, calling them to find themselves again as Jews, focusing on this core reality of Ahavat Yisrael, the sense that we all have responsibility for one another, that the very capacity to say the phrase "we Jews" was a beginning, an important beginning. And also with that wonderful, wonderful phrase, "Nothing Jewish is alien to me." We focused in our first day on relationship and presence, a way of being as Jewish disciples of Yeshua in relationship to the Jewish people. Yesterday in our second session, we focused on mercy and justice, a way of acting, a way of living that shares in the vocation and calling of the Jewish people within the world. And finally, this morning, we are going to be focusing on study and learning and culture, growing and recognizing that we are not all there, we are all on the way. Those words of Franz Rosenzweig that I cited were from messages he was giving at the launch of something that was called the Frankfurt Lehrhaus. It was an adult education center for German Jews. And it was being opened after the First World War, and it had a powerful impact in the period just before the rise of the Nazis. And then in the early Nazi period, there was a kind of revival among assimilated German Jews at that period. Well, my hope and my prayer is that we might help to experience and galvanize among Jewish believers in Yeshua around the world a similar kind of revival of Jewish identity, that we might come home and find ourselves each in our own unique way, each on our own unique journey, but also having a journey together. We were going to begin with a presentation exploring the topic more from Father Antoine Levy, who is a priest and theologian of the Dominican order. He was the co-chair with me of the Helsinki consultation on Jewish continuity in the body of the Messiah, that group which gave birth to Yachad BeYeshua, and one of the founding members of Yachad BeYeshua. He's currently established doing research at the École Biblique in Jerusalem. So without further ado, Father Antoine, let's greet Father Antoine and open things up. I'm sorry.
A few considerations on Ahavat Israel, a notion that I find misleadingly self-evident. The best way to approach it is to remind us of one of the most basic anti-Semitic tropes of modernity. Jews are selfish. They are always ready to help one another and could not care less about non-Jews. This misunderstanding of Ahavat Israel does not spare Jews and even great Jewish intellectuals. Now, Richard Harvey is a remarkable Yachad BeYeshua fellow, and I say that not only because he just bought me a magnificent pair of shoes, but because he managed to pick up the one text I wanted to comment on before I had a chance to do it. I am referring to this exchange from the written correspondence between Gershom Scholem and Hannah Arendt. But please bear with me. I will take this passage in a slightly different direction. So, as you know, this exchange, Scholem blames Arendt for a lack of Ahavat Israel, etc. This Ahavat Israel, which is indefinable, yet fully concrete, center of our existence that you don't understand at all, you leftist Jew. And now this extract from Arendt's reply to Scholem that we read already, that I want to remind you of it. I'll write you out, I have no such love, and for two reasons. I've never in my life loved some nation or collective, not the German, French, American nation. The fact is that I love only my friends. I'm quite incapable of any sort of love. And second, this kind of love for the Jews would seem suspect to me, since I'm Jewish myself and I don't love myself or anything I know that belongs to the substance of my being. And Arendt's reply helps us to understand why Ahavat Israel is far from self-evident. This non-evident character of Ahavat Israel actually corroborates the position of great rabbis who see in this love a supreme mitzvah granted to few, Christian would call a very special grace from above. First, Arendt argues that no real human love is involved when the object of this love is an abstraction, collective entity. And second, she claims that this love, where it is an object of experience, would not be love, but sheer selfishness. It would like be caring only about one's own self while pretending to care about others. In my opinion, Arendt's absence of understanding derives from this fundamental misunderstanding. As you know well, Americans love to say that they love things. I just love peanut butter. I love smoothies. Compare this kind of statement to the following kind of statements. I love my wife. I love my country. We're not dealing with the same kind of love in the two situations, are we? We love things when their possession, their fruition, as St. Augustine would say, entail some degree of pleasure or practical benefit. And this kind of love is selfish by definition. This is not the case of the love of a husband for his wife or children, provided it's real love. The fact that this disposition can lead a husband to sacrifice his life for his loved ones proves that this is not based on selfishness. It's not about possession or profit, it's about value. It is a value in itself. Contrary to what Arendt claimed, loving one's country or one's people is not essentially different from loving one's wife, children, friends. That one can sacrifice one's life for one's country is a proof that this type of love is also about value and not about possession or profit. Don't ask yourself what your country can do for you, etc. I also take issue with Arendt's first reason for dismissing Ahavat Israel, namely that A nation or a people is an abstract entity by contrast to our friends or family. Whenever I think of the latter and contemplate the possibility of sacrificing my life in the name of it, I do not refer to abstract values or ideas, no matter how beautiful they are, freedom, democracy, greatness, you name it, that could be separated from a concrete people, the few individuals I know, as much as the gigantic number of those I do not personally and will never know in my life. And this is all the more true about this relation of Ahavat Israel, be that when I walk on the streets of Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, there's not a single Jewish face, secretive Haredi or a gay beachgoer that I could not identify as personally related to me. That's my father, my mother, my cousins, and why not my dearest old enemies. This is my people with their endless variety, antagonists, contradictions, and the sum of all these constitutes the object of Ahavat Israel. This is this gut feeling that I have something essential in common with all these people. Religion, in a very broad sense, history, the whole tragedy of it, culture, whatever it includes, and more than that, the sense of a unique mission, the content of which no one among us can exactly pin down, but that all of us somehow carry on our shoulders, both collectively and individually. Coming now to the topic of studies, I would say that our decision puts us in a peculiar situation. As you know, study is at the heart of Judaism. I would say that it is a living, walking pillar of fire that has guided a nation deprived of home, of geographical, cultural unity throughout the desert of a bimillennial exile. That all Jews were not able to study did not matter as long as some were able to do so. Among other goals, the purpose of Jewish study was, and while it continues to be, that of erecting a fence that would inseparably protect the Torah and draw a line in the sand between Jews and non-Jews, Christians in particular. So the question reads, why, and if so, to what extent should study continue to have the same significance for Jews who have crossed the red line that separated them from the community of Yeshua believers? Significance is not content. What is meant by study in rabbinic tradition is a creative discussion related to religious observance that derives from a fixed set of principles, among which faith of Yeshua is conspicuously absent when not explicitly denied. Jewish disciples of Yeshua can, and in my opinion, ought to become cognizant of Jewish halachic tradition, but they can hardly insert themselves into a dynamic of thinking that is dismissive of their own faith. The question is whether there needs to be an equivalent to halachic study that would correspond to the unique situation of Jewish Yeshua believers. And this is a real question. Often we look at our Jewish identity as a given, as something ingrained in us once and for all. We're convinced that there's something as an existence, a power of its own, independently of Orthodox belief, education, even with little Jewish culture. We are able to sense situation, identify people and things, reason on matters of religion, but on other matters in a Jewish way. We know that no one will ever be able to take that away from us. It's not that we do not feel the need to become more knowledgeable about our religious beliefs, but we're also well aware that we'll not be able to receive the elements of enlightenment we're seeking from a tradition that dismisses our faith. Accordingly, we may read things about Jewish tradition, Jewish history, etc., but this attitude can hardly prevent our Jewish identity from becoming something rather marginal or insignificant in our existence as Jewish disciples of Yeshua. In practice, we deal with it as a Presbyterian Scotsman. I'm sorry for if there's any Presbyterian Scotsmen here. We deal with the history of clans, the symbolism of kilts, and the musical repertoire of bagpipes. We are disciples of Christ with an interest in Jewish things. And yet, if we came to this conference, if we became members of Yachad BeYeshua, it's because at some point, we acquire the conviction that there was something wrong, or at least insufficient, with this way of living out our faith as Jewish disciples of Yeshua. And it's not a question of personal, intellectual, spiritual comfort. What was awakened in us is a very deep awareness of a fundamental sense of responsibility that is directly related to this great mitzvah of Ahavat Israel that I evoked earlier. We are not simply Yeshua believers who happen to be Jewish. We are Jews who want to remain Jews in a sense that is not less integral than it was for Franz Rosenzweig, while declaring our faith in Yeshua. We do not merely think that Jewishness should be kept alive in the world of Christians as a flower in a pot. We think that Jewish identity of Yeshua believers is in itself something unique, something that carries with it an irreplaceable and crucial message destined for others than for ourselves. And this is a big claim. It's an existential claim. We are not traitors to the Jewish world, and we are not simply to be tolerated by the Christian world. Mildly put, we have a dignity of our own. And just as any claim, our claim needs to be substantiated. What do we have to bring to the table? We certainly need professional theologians to deliver the message we carry in an articulated form. However, it would be an error to leave this matter in the hands of professional theologians. Who are we? Who is each of us if each and every one of us is unable to give an account of what we believe, why we believe what we believe, and why we live our faith the way we do? Whether we like it or not, we're sitting on a fence between the Jewish world and the Christian world. It's an uncomfortable position, and for this very same reason, it's a dynamic one. Speaking of Yeshua, the only narratives that are at disposal are conceived in an either-or mode. Either you're a Jew and then you're against Yeshua, you're for Yeshua, and you're a Christian. Each mode had 2,000 years to develop and hone its inner coherence. Our coherence is not an either-or coherence. It's an and one. However, after 2,000 years, it still has to see the light of day. How should one be both a Jew and a Yeshua believer? What is the rationale here, both in terms of history, ethical practice, religious lifestyle? We, the members of Yachad BeYeshua, come from very different denominations, and we have no intention to relinquish our respective denominations. We are not here to establish a new church, whatever that means. And yet, the task that each one of us took upon himself or herself is identical for all of us. What we crucially need to understand here is that we are not developing or fortifying our inner religious coherence for our own sake. The collective task I'm referring to is a mission that is both inseparably directed at the Christian world and at the Jewish world. Yes, we crossed the red line. Yes, our focus is on united traditions that are divided rather than on strengthening the separation between traditions that once were united. But it does not mean that we find ourselves in some sort of no man's land and can do whatever we want as we enjoy the best of both traditions. It means that we have a responsibility toward both these worlds. Through study, Judaism built a fence that has been keeping its main outsider, Christianity, at a distance. Now, if our Ahavat Israel is real, if we really have this ongoing existence of Jews at heart, then we are looking to do exactly the same, although not outside the world of Yeshua believers, but within it. Our task is to explain to our brothers and sisters in Yeshua why Jewishness, not only as an idea, but in the mode of concrete human beings, us, embodied in the flesh of a people, is an inalienable part of their world and needs to be cherished and protected as such. This means that our relationship with Jewish tradition must be creative. It also must be deeply respectful, anchored in a very serious and thorough knowledge of its content. as we see all along the development of Judaism, real creativity is anchored in a thorough knowledge of the previous traditions, nurtured by a profound respect for its admirable spiritual and intellectual fruits. Rabbinic Judaism was driven by a much justified distrust of Christianity when, through its focus on study, it undertook to build a fence that would protect the ongoing existence of the Jewish nation. The fence that we want to build within Christianity is also meant to warrant the perennity of the Jewish nation. But rather than on the likelihood of envy and hatred, it bets the house, as it were, on the love and understanding of our fellow Yeshua believers. After 2,000 years of contempt and persecution, we trust that our brothers and sisters have come to the point where they realize what treasure the permanence of the first covenant, the covenant with Moses, is for the whole people born of the covenant in Christ. The constitution of a Jewish voice within the body of Christ does not only require the existence of Jews who believe in Yeshua, but also of Jewish Yeshua believers who are able to manifest the coherence, the purpose of their existence, something that only the spiritual and intellectual effort tying together two traditions in faithfulness to scriptures can achieve. Once again, there is no ready-made corpus of knowledge that we simply need to learn so that we might comply with it. There are numerous corpora of knowledge, there's scriptures, tradition, theology, culture, art, you name it, that we must familiarize ourselves with. If we do not create our own coherence out of this material, no one else will do it for us. As in the famous episode of Aknai's Oven in the Talmud, we must be able to tell God, your Torah is in our hands. And just as in the epilogue of the same episode, I hope that God, seeing from above what we do with his Torah, will smile and he will say, my own children have won.
Thank you, Antoine, for opening up the topic for us. And now we are going to have three presentations by members of Yachad BeYeshua, which will focus on how they have been pursuing this call to study and to learning, and what it might therefore mean for the rest of us. We will first hear from Dr. David Rudolph, who is the director of the Messianic Jewish Studies and professor of New Testament and Jewish Studies at the King's University in Southlake, Texas. He and his wife, Harumi, have 3 daughters and a son-in-law, all of whom are members of Yachad BeYeshua, and a grandson who is a 4th-generation Messianic Jew. So, David.
Thank you, Mark. So this has been a really interesting exercise for me to just think about the ways in which I relate Ahavat Yeshua, Ahavat Yisrael to the areas of culture and study. So I'm going to share a number of reflections that came to me. They're not all in a particular order, but I'm hopeful that this won't be just a list, but something that perhaps might be inspiring for some of us in terms of ways in which we could connect if we haven't. So one way that I express Ahavat Yisrael is that every day I read articles from the Forward. I have a subscription to this Jewish publication, and I probably read 3 to 4 articles a day, actually. I find them to be really helpful, and they help me to connect to what's going on in the Jewish world. Another way is one of my daughters works for a Jewish advocacy organization, and I follow their regular updates I also follow several other Jewish advocacy organizations that specifically focus on fighting anti-Semitism. These include the American Jewish Committee, the Adam and Gila Milstein Family Foundation, and also the Anti-Defamation League. I get so many emails every day just by subscribing to these websites. But I want to tell you, I don't unsubscribe because I have found this to be so rich. With ADL in particular, I just wanted to mention that I regularly look at their ADL tracker, which tracks anti-Semitic acts on a daily and weekly basis. In other words, we don't have to just randomly wait until the newspapers or media organizations mention it to us. You can actually see almost in real time when anti-Semitic incidents occur, and I have found that very helpful. I've participated in the U.S. Holocaust Museum's annual seminar on ethics, religion, and the Holocaust, which involved engaging with a number of Jewish scholars. And the great thing about attending that seminar was that it introduced me to all the resources of the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And all of these resources are not just available on ground in Washington, D.C., but a lot of them are actually available online on their website. So I just encourage you to take a look. I've watched many testimonies of Holocaust survivors, and they just have all kinds of projects that I've looked at and have found to be extremely helpful. Let's talk about Jewish books. So staying on top of scholarship in Jewish studies has been kind of a love affair of mine. And one way that I do that is every year I attend or try to attend the Society of Biblical Literature Conference, SBL, which goes to different cities each year. This coming year, it's going to be in San Antonio. So if you go to SBL, as I do every year, just about, literally you will see an entire huge conference room filled with book tables. Jewish booksellers come, they bring their books with them, and you can just go, and non-Jewish booksellers as well. But JPS is there, Jewish Lights is there, Art Scroll. I'm not sure if Art Scroll is there. Koren is there. It's a wonderful place to go to pick up catalogs, to look at what's coming out. And I have found that to be a way to stay on top of what's coming out in Jewish studies. Also, when I'm at SBL, I attend many times sessions that where Jewish scholars are delivering papers. So I go to those sessions, I listen to what they're presenting, and that's an opportunity to ask questions or to engage them after the conference, to email them and say, hey, I loved your session and I'd love to hear more about this topic, or I have a question. And that's been a wonderful way to stay connected. Also, almost every day, probably every day, I receive a news feed, or maybe not news is correct, a feed update on academia.edu. Academia.edu is like this incredible website where literally millions upon millions of free articles are available written by scholars. Not all of them are Jewish scholars, but there are many hundreds, probably thousands of Jewish scholars that upload their articles on academia.edu. When that happens, I follow probably more than 300 Jewish scholars. So when they upload their new articles, that enters into my feed. And then every morning when I wake up, I get the update. And so I read some of these articles, and if they're a real blessing to me, many times I'll contact that Jewish scholar and say, thank you so much for your article. Maybe I'll have a question. Again, it's an opportunity for me to get to know them, to interact with them. And it connects me to what's going on in the Jewish world in the area of learning and culture. Also, another area where related to books, fortunately I have a wife, my wife Harumi, who just like feeds my obsession with good books. So she is very supportive, and but this actually came from my father. Like father, like they say in Japan, "Kaeru no ko wa kaeru." Kaeru, the little frog is like the big frog. My father every Sunday would bring me to the local Jewish bookstore. And he said to me when I was a child, "David, whatever book you want to buy, I will buy for you at the bookstore." And so I took him up on it. Every time we would go to the Jewish bookstore, I'd say, "Dad, could I have this book?" Sometimes it would be 5 books, sometimes 10 books he would buy for me. There was no limit to the. Now I tried to be somewhat sensitive because I knew he didn't have endless resources, but literally every time we would come back from the Jewish bookstore, I walked away with a pile of books. And that was because my dad wanted to place within me a love for Jewish learning. And so over the course of many years, I've developed a Jewish library, Jewish studies library. And then my father, over the course of really 40 to 50 years, has developed an incredible Jewish studies library. Many of the books are translations of primary sources or the primary sources themselves. He recently transferred a large portion of that library to me. So I can't tell you how many like editions of the Talmud I have, and how many editions of the Mishnah I have, and Tosefta, and just, so I feel my father has been a very important mentor for me, an example in this area. In addition to buying books and receiving scholarship from others, I've also contributed to Jewish studies. So some years back, I wrote an article for the Jewish Journal entitled "No Pork, Just a Little." And in that article, I recounted a college road trip. This was a popular article, obviously, that I had with my oldest daughter, Hannah, where we went to various cities. And when we went to Boston, we went for dim sum. And there, normally, when I would go with my family for dim sum, I would always ask the waitress, "Is there pork or shellfish in that dish?" And then they would answer, and if it was pork, "No, I'm sorry, we can't eat that." So this time on the college road trip, Hannah said, "Is there pork or shellfish in that dish?" And then the waitress said, "No pork, just a little." And then Hannah said, "Well, then we won't eat it." And it was at that moment that I realized that she had become a young Jewish woman, and that I could have confidence that she would be okay in the big wide world as she was heading out to college. So I wrote about that college road trip, and the Jewish Journal published it. And that's just one example. I have 2 essays published in the Encyclopedia of the Jewish Diaspora. And I have an article in Hebrew Studies, a journal published by the National Association of Professors of Hebrew. And so these are just all examples of ways that I've tried to contribute to the world of Jewish learning, not just receive from it. I've also taught at the Georgetown University Program for Jewish Civilization. So that was an opportunity to participate as a scholar in the field of Jewish studies in a mainstream Jewish studies department. Sometimes switching over to local synagogues, sometimes I attend my mom's synagogue online. She lives in Maryland, I live in Texas. So it's an opportunity to go with her to synagogue in a way. Sometimes I'm a member of a local Messianic synagogue, but sometimes I go to my local Reform synagogue, Beth Israel. As you may recall, Beth Israel is that synagogue where Rabbi Charlie was taken hostage by a terrorist a year and a half ago. Rabbi Charlie welcomed Harumi and me to attend the services as a Messianic Jewish family, though he made it clear that we would not count in a minyan because he didn't consider me a Jew because of my belief in Yeshua. Still, it was a way to express Ahavat Yisrael and participate in the local Jewish community. And by the way, just in my remaining few seconds, it's interesting to just mention that Rabbi Charlie took, after the service one day, he put his arm around me. And we went to like the middle of the sanctuary, and in a loud voice, he said, "David, I just, I love having you here. You're my first Messianic Jewish friend." And then the whole congregation knew that we were a Messianic Jewish family. But it was his way of letting everyone know it's okay. I know he's a Messianic Jew, and I'm supportive of him being here. I've studied with Jewish professors. For example, I took a course at Harvard on Jewish identity, taught by Shai Cohen. At Cambridge, where I did my PhD, I had attended lectures by many Jewish scholars, as well as visiting Jewish scholars like Daniel Boyarin and others. I've taken several years of biblical Hebrew and Aramaic and Ugaritic and Akkadian and Little Moabite, and completed an MA in biblical languages, which has allowed me to read biblical and rabbinic texts in the original languages when I need to. I have a collection of Jewish jokes that I've stored up over the course of 20 years. It's called the Rudolph Family Jewish Joke Book. Every day I say Berachot, and Jewish prayer is a part of my life in various ways on Shabbat and festivals especially. And lastly, I have an interest in Jewish art. My favorite artist is Michal Schwartz, who is the personal artist of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. There are just so many areas where I feel like I can grow in Ahavat Yisrael, and I look forward to learning from others here about ways that I can further express myself in this area. Thank you.
I have, on many occasions, spent time at the Rudolph household, and have always felt very welcome and at home, because basically it is a library with a dining room table, a couch, and a couple beds, and just my kind of place. Now to share with us will be Abi Doukhan, who's Associate Professor of Philosophy at Queens College of the City University of New York. Her graduate studies were in France. She's written books on Emmanuel Levinas and the Song of Songs. She participates both in a Christian church in New York and in synagogue life there. And I don't want to reduce anyone to someone who they're related to, but I just have to say, Avi's father, Jacques Doukhan, was part of the Helsinki consultation meetings in the earliest stages more than 10 years ago. And he is just a wonderful, lovely, and brilliant man. So we're just overjoyed to have Abi with us and as a member of Yachad BeYeshua. So Abi, come and share with us.
So, oops. Do I need this? Yes. Can you hear me? I feel a little. Okay. Should I just talk louder? I can talk like this. No, I need that. Okay.
Check.
Good. Okay. Maybe like that in my face. Okay. Okay. So this is interesting. He talked about my dad. He never told me a word about you guys. I did not know you guys existed. I stumbled on you by chance. Closer like this? Because it's like, I gotta. Oh, wait, I got this. Okay, I got it. Yeah. Check. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Are we good? Are we good? Okay. So yeah, I stumbled on you by chance, and I'm so happy I made it. I made such really interesting encounters. This was really, I needed this. Okay, I'm gonna move this paper here. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to tell you about my love story with Jewish text. This is a love journey that I embarked very early in my life. I grew up, as some of you might know, in a kind of hybrid setting. I was raised in a Jewish home, but in a Christian community. So I kind of always navigated seamlessly between both traditions. I thought I was Jewish until people told me I wasn't. It was a shock. So in any case, early on in my school journey, my parents sent me back to France, and I studied there for high school. And right away, if you're familiar with the French system, they have a heavy load of philosophy. And we started to study Voltaire. And Voltaire wrote a book called The Treatise of Toleration, where he bashes religion and says basically religion is the origin of all war, of all criminality, of all violence. And I have to admit, I was convinced by Voltaire. First of all, he writes very well. So already he convinced me like that. And then I was like, it makes sense. This makes sense. So at 18 years old, I had always grown up, feeling like I was a Christian or a Jew, whatever. And all of a sudden, everything started to crash down. I start to wonder even if there is a God, because he really made sense. He convinced me. I had never come across any argument like that. And I was feeling the ground under me shake as I began to struggle for the first time of my life with doubt. I wasn't sure anymore if God existed and if Christianity was not just a big invention in order to oppress the masses. I was utterly convinced by Voltaire. I struggled. I still got my my high school diploma miraculously. I had this kind of dual thing going on where I didn't believe in God and then God was helping me. So I was like living a double life. When I was done with high school, my dad told me, you're coming back home and you're studying with me for a year. So he put me in the seminary. I was just, this was bad, like master's level, but he was like, you're going to sit in class and you're going to listen to me for once. So I was like, okay, I like to study. I was happy. It was the best year of my life. He taught his whole repertoire, which was the Hebrew Bible. We went through everything. And I was sitting in the class, coming in with the idea that the Bible was boring, to all of a sudden feeling the sky open up like a scroll. It was a revelation. It was like a Daniel level revelation or Ezekiel level revelation. It was as though all of a sudden I had been given a key into the treasures of the Jewish tradition that I only knew superficially through ritual. And now I was entering these mansions, these castles, these palaces of knowledge. He introduced me to the splendor of literary architecture in the Hebrew Bible. He introduced me to the human relevance of certain texts, to the restlessness and audacity of wisdom literature. And I was just, I was in. So at the end of that year, he encouraged me to get baptized. And, I must be the only person in the world who got baptized into a text. It was not into a church. I know they thought it was, but for me, I was getting baptized into a text. I was so with it. Like, this was my home. This text was my people. This text was my church. And so, I got baptized, Christian baptism, but really, it was really a baptism into the Hebrew Bible. No one knows this until I just realized it recently. Yet, in spite of all this, the doubt lingered on, right? I was convinced by the text, but still, I think it's Levinas who says, okay, a book was revealed on Sinai, but what if it was dreamers, right? What if this was just a masterpiece, right, of literature? So I went on into philosophy, predictably, given my intellectual composition. And, I was, kind of in the worst school, really, for philosophy. It was Michigan State University. How much time do I have? Where am I? Ooh, okay. And the absolute worst. But I met a mentor there who really got me. Oh, you know this. You're from there. Oh, you're at U of M. We are the rivals. Yeah, we are the rival school. We dare. In football speaking, not intellectually speaking. So I came to my mentor saying, I want to do something on, I was very vague, Jewish existentialism, Judaism and existentialism. He looked at me and he's like, you will do something on Levinas. I said, oh, Levinas, who's that? So I got the text from the library. I went home. It was Thanksgiving. I read the whole text and I came back. And then he's like, okay, so what do you think? I'm like, oh, I loved it. I said, I loved it. I didn't understand a word, but I loved it. Like this text, I mean, if you read Levinas, you just have to get caught in the rhythm. It's poetry. It's spoken word poetry. I mean, you can just recite that stuff in the New Yorker in New York City as a spoken word poem, and it works. It has it's just a flux of just amazing, beautiful words. Like, I wrote some of them down. Enigma, phenomenon, otherwise than being, the trace, substance, substantiation. I mean, I was just like, I didn't understand a single word, but it's like, oh my God, this is beautiful. I need to understand what this is. I feel like he's onto something with these words. It was just, he seduced me with his language. He's an absolute seducer. So I fell for him hard, ended up the next 10 years suffering and weeping over these texts. And the doubt still with me until one day I fell upon a text by chance called Enigma and Phenomenon by Levinas. And I read the whole text and I came across a sentence, which I swear God wrote for me with his very hand. He put it in the book and he put it in my lap. The sentence is this one: Enigma is the way of the absolute. So I will translate what that means, right? Remember, I'm struggling with doubt. And I want to also say a few words about Levinas and his connection to doubt before I parse that sentence, which for me was just, again, another gift of God. Levinas is writing in post-Holocaust context. His whole family has been destroyed by the Holocaust. Everybody is doubting God, whether he exists or if he exists, who is he? Because we don't recognize him, right? This is not the God we believed in. And so doubt is really the way of life. In the French context. There's no way around it. And Levinas makes a masterful move at that moment. He makes doubt the royal road to God. He doesn't try to convince people to believe in God. He doesn't try to go back to false certainties. He says, doubt, this is it. We are there. We are where we are meant to be. We are even closer to God than before when we were sure of ourselves. We can see the influence here of Maimonides, which I won't get into, but it's there. And so all of a sudden I realized doubt is the royal road to God, meaning my doubt is maybe not as sinful as I thought it was, right? I was thinking the whole time my doubt was separating me from God. My doubt was, shameful. My doubt was filling me with guilt. And all of a sudden I'm revealed at that moment from God, who wrote this text by hand for me and placed it in this article by Levinas, that in a way, God was creating space for my questions, hospitality for my questions, hospitality for my struggles. And all of a sudden I realized that the true faith is not certainty. The true faith is a journey. And I'm brought back to what you said in the homily today, that in a way, the faith is a journey full of surprises. It's unknown. It's something that we can never predict what is next. I'm reminded here in the biblical definition of God, when God revealed himself to Moses, when he said, I will be who I will be. Right? I will be who I will be, meaning you don't know what's next. Life is full of surprises. And you never know what's going to happen. And as long as you dwell in that joyful expectation that something, as long as you never have false certainties or strict agendas or rigid goals, I will get you places, right? And so one of the most beautiful gifts that the Jewish tradition gave me, I mean, of course, I say God gave it to me, but it was really Levinas. It was Levinasian text. It was Levinasian. It was the whole intellectual history of Judaism, which has always understood doubt as holy. Our questions are a holy endeavor. Whereas in Christianity, sadly, doubt is seen as sinful. You're not supposed to have questions. If you have questions, just shut up, stay. You can't have these questions. It's forbidden. So for me, coming from a Christian context, having grown up in Christian schools, this was new. And it was something which I'll never forget. I have 3 seconds. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I want to close on this something I've noticed and something I point out to my students when I teach at Queens College. So I always have a blend of Jews and Christians in my classes, and we study, I force them to do a Hebrew text, Hebrew Bible, biblical text in all of my classes. They have to do some. And there's one particular class where it's all just Hebrew wisdom literature. And I tell them, I right away warn them, when you come in the classroom, you need to shift your perspective as you enter these texts. And this is how I describe it. I say, listen, I've noticed something. When it comes to biblical text, I have noticed that Jews feel more at home than Christians. So I will explain. You know how you come to visit your friend and you get in the house and you open the fridge and you take out whatever you want, then you sit, you put your feet on the coffee table, you turn on the TV, right? You don't ask. This is in a way the way Jews enter the Jewish text. They come in, they ask questions, they're rude, they disagree with the text. Have you ever been in a synagogue where they study? It's amazing. The synagogue I go to on Saturday morning, they're studying and like, well, I don't agree with this. This is archaic. This is right. And they're questioning and struggling with it. And they're not afraid. They're comfortable. Christians come in, they sit down, fold their knees, their legs like this, and they're so worried about asking questions, at least in my tradition. I don't know about other Christian traditions, but it's so worried about being blasphemous and so forth. And so I tell them, in this text, you need to be at home. You need to open the fridge, put your feet on the table. We need to relax and create room to ask questions. And I believe this is the gift that the Jewish tradition has given me, is the space, the permission to doubt and to ask questions and to sometimes disagree even with God. So that's it. Sorry, not much on Yeshua. I'm still on that journey. Clearly.
Wow, that was something. Finally, we are going to hear from Svetlana Panich, and Svetlana chaired the session yesterday, so we are familiar with Svetlana. She's a member of the International Coordinating Committee of Yachad BeYeshua, one of the founding members of the Helsinki Consultation, visiting researcher here at Wycliffe College for a period of time, originally from Moscow. So Svetlana, come and share with us.
I need to start with 2 reservations. First of all, I need to apologize that my presentation will partly repeat Father Antoine's presentation. We have not previous agreement about it, but as the Yiddish proverb says, all schlemazels have common thoughts. The second reservation is sounds like a kind of my confession. I need to confess that I don't too often, not always, too often, I have no love for Israel. I have no love for my fellow Jews, for my fellow Jews, especially when they are doing or supporting horrible things, like Jewish oligarchs who support the war in Ukraine, or Jewish Israeli journalists who consciously spread the evident lie. I don't love them just because they are Jews, people of covenant, who by their evil doing betray their Jewishness. I have a lot of questions to the politics, to the social situation of the state of Israel. And I would, answering the question about my personal love to Israel, I would rather repeat the same quote of Hannah Arendt as was repeated during the last days at least 2 times. I have no such love, and for 2 reasons. First, I have never in my life loved some nations or collective, the Germans, French, or American nation, or the working class. The fact is that I love only my friends, and I'm quite incapable of any other sort of life. Among those friends who represented for me Ahavat Israel in the most beautiful and clear form, I'd like to name three persons. The first is my grandfather. He was a Litvak, practicing Jew, a member of the secret Minyan in Ukraine. When I told him that in the university, I have a course on scripture, it was a part of the medieval studies curriculum, he said, well, when Russian children and Jewish children are studying Torah together, and there is a teacher with them, I will die in peace. The second was my father, who taught me everyday righteousness as standing for those who are persecuted for their Jewishness, silently helping enormous number of people without asking about their ethnicity and beliefs, opening doors of our house for those who were in need. And the third was a friend of my father, an elderly Jewish man whose name was Solomon. From time to time, father visited him for serious talks, as they said, and anytime when I came with him, Solomon gave me a book, a new book. These were not only Jewish books, but all of them were that kind of books that shape a soul. All these people were practicing Jews. No one of them talked to me or with me about religion. But looking back, I realized that they were for me my living Torah. And the main lesson I took from them is that the existential issues, religious, in a proper sense, religious issues can be taught primarily by the person presence. This lesson, I think, is extremely important now in the world overloaded with empty words and false rhetorics. One of the victims of these false rhetorics is surely the word love, that is misused too often, both by secular world and by Jewish Christian world, by the religious people. Under the influence of Romanticism, it is widely understood as something like a sweet sentiment or as ethnographic attraction, like an attraction, like a love for Tsimes or klezmer music. During these days, we talked a lot about realism, about realistic love for Israel, and as well as about the temptations of theoretical love to theoretical Israel, or as yesterday Lee said, abstract thinking about abstract nation. For me, one of the most powerful sources of this realistic love is biblical idea of love, not as a passion, not as a sentiment, but as an integral, permanently deepening, and at the same time challenging knowing. In scripture, to love means not to admire emotionally, not only to admire emotionally, and of course not to possess, but to know in integrity, to know something in integrity and with all inevitable controversies. Love for controversies is a part of a Jewish thinking, for sure. It explains why I see education as a way to Ahavat Israel per excellence, as a way of connecting with Jews throughout history and throughout world. In my opinion, the methodological paradigm of this education as a form of love to Israel could be shaped by two words addressed to the Jewish nation as commandments, were listen and remember. I will start with the second word. With the second word, of course, it will be just a sketching, very, very superficial, very, very primitive sketching. Remembering in reference to Jewish education means, at least for me, the construction of the profound and, first of all, honest historical memory. This kind of Jewish Christian historical memory would include not only the image of nation as a victim of pogroms, Shoah, anti-Semitic persecutions, etc., but also, as the opposite pole, the idea of the greatest achievements of the Jewish people, but also the very strong and very demanding reflection on our own responsibility as people of covenant, responsibility both towards our fellow Jews and toward the humanity. The historical events of the last 2 centuries prove again and again how dangerous the image of the nation as victim can be. And it is very serious warning for our construction of the common Jewish Christian historical memory. Listening as a methodological basis for the Jewish education, in my mind, means only listening God speaking through texts and events of history, but listening, first of all, listening to each other in all variety of Jewish experiences and cultural languages. Okay, I would say that the Rosenzweig formula quoted by Mark, nothing Jewish is alien, to me can be one of the most methodological principles of Jewish education and Jewish culture of listening. Jewish nation, of course, is a nation of narrative, a nation of story, but the education has to embody not only that that Jewish storytelling, but the very specific kind of Jewish story listening, very careful and unbiased, including all Jewish experience in diachronic and historical perspective. And when it goes about practical examples of this listening and storytelling, I'm thinking about the unique enterprise that started in 1925 in Vilna. It is IVO Institute for Jewish Researches, Yiddish Wissenschaftliche Institute, as it was named. It existed until 1940s in Vilna. Then it had to be relocated to New York, where it exists until now. The main idea of IVO was not only making Jewish research for the sake of Jewish research, but to bridging Jewish world and Jewish religious world and Jewish secular world, Jewish world of the own practices, culture, oral history, and Jewish and non-Jewish world. And I will end with my hope that this tradition, altogether with other traditions, other similar traditions, will be followed and developed by, in the Christian context, by the Jewish Christian branch of Wycliffe College. Thank you.